Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Kurdistan Connection with myself, Matt Broomfield, here on Medya News. If you're listening to this podcast, you're doubtless aware that significant local elections have taken place in Turkey in recent weeks. Local perhaps being not quite the right word, since these elections have seen changes and significant political developments on the level of Turkey's largest cities in Istanbul and Ankara, and also major developments in the country's Kurdish regions, which is what we're going to be speaking about today. And perhaps elections actually isn't quite the right word, since this political process has been marked by attempts by the government, particularly in Kurdish regions, to subvert the democratic process and the rule of law. In particular, and what we're going to speak about today, is an attempt by the Turkish government not to respect the result of the vote in Van, one of the largest cities in the Turkish-occupied regions of Kurdistan. What happened there we'll discuss in more detail today, but in essence the Turkish government tried to repeat a policy which was previously implemented by imposing its own candidate over the democratically elected Kurdish candidate, from what was in this case the pro-Kurdish Dem party. The government has done this before very often, and in fact that's what happened to our guest today, Bedia Özgökçe, who is former mayor or elected mayor of Van, but who wasn't able to take office during the last elections due to such a subversion of the rule of law. Bedia, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mark, for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So yeah, we will hear now what happened, because as it turns out, in Van on this occasion, the government tried to impose its own candidate, but the people came out to the streets. There were major demonstrations, there were outcry in the media, both pro-Kurdish opposition, but also other opposition actors made public their opposition to this process. And ultimately, after 2 days, the government's electoral board said, fine, and on this occasion decided to allow the democratically elected candidate to take office. This was celebrated in some quarters as a victory. My guest today has had personal experience of this process herself, and I think it would be really useful to hear her perspective. We're very honoured to have you here today and to share what has changed. How is the situation in Van, a city that you know so well? So yeah, let's come then to our first question. As we've said, the Turkish government could previously successfully impose its own, what are called trustees or kayyum, in many cities across Turkish Kurdistan, 61 out of 65 of those cities after previous elections. What was different this time round in Van?
Yeah, thank you again. First of all, I should point out that the trustees are not politicians at all. They are ostensibly and officially, they are civil servants, but in reality, they are all AKP, MHP members, and they are colonial governors. The trustee regime entered the history of Turkey during the declaration of the state of emergency after the coup attempt in 2016, with a presidential decree amending the municipality law. They were appointed to 98 of the 102 municipalities we won at that time. Our mayors were arrested. They are still in jail, some of them, and municipal councils were dissolved. Governors were appointed instead of mayors. And instead of the municipal council, the municipality and the budget of the city was governed by a group of municipal officers, which were close to the AKP regime and that colonial governors. On March 2019, elections came again, were held again, and this time our party HDP won 66 municipalities. And on the very first day, the mayors of 6 of our municipalities, 3 of which are the districts of one, were not given their certificates of office and were replaced by the AKP candidate who lost the election. This was an application that did not exist in the law and was invented by the Supreme Electoral Board at that time. And no one made a sound except us. Trustees were appointed not only to elected mayors, but also to our council members in places where we are in the majority. And this was invented so that we could not have the council majority. And in 2019, only after 4 months later, in a midnight operation, trustees were appointed simultaneously to the 3 metropolitan municipalities of Van, Diyarbakır, and Mardin, which we had won. Me, Selçuk Mızraklı, and Ahmet Türk were suspended from our duties. The municipal council was never called for a meeting, and they were governed by trustees until this 2024 elections. Yes, we are discussing about Van, and I'm talking about the examples in Van, but what Van experienced as a people during the trustee regime, all Kurdish provinces and Kurdish people experienced. The trustee issue is the name of a colonial regime in Turkey. It is being implemented by colonial governors with a decision taken by the state, and they wanted to continue it this time again. Throughout the history of Turkey, it's 100 years, there has been a deep discrimination, a deep inequality in the Kurdish populated areas. Basic services such as health, education, urban infrastructure, and superstructure have never been equally distributed. Kurdish provinces have always been deprived of basic services in all areas of life, from education to health. And we are living in the 21st century. Can you imagine, for the first time under the municipalities elected by the Kurdish people themselves, water, roads, the very basic services and infrastructure services were provided to the neighborhoods. And these basic services have still not been provided by the government. It is their basic duty. The use of the budget created with the taxes of these Kurdish people as well for the people has been prevented in every period. When our party won in 2014 102 municipalities, we can say that the state was almost scared of this image. There's two main factors, two main reasons for this. Firstly, especially after the 2014 local elections results, we had a great success. The Kurdish cities in Turkey, historically, almost all of northern Kurdistan showed through local government elections that they are in power in the region. And the spokesperson of the parliament at that time expressed this fear, this state's fear, when he said that the Kurds had reached the Armenian border. The state wing expressed its discomfort with the emerging situation at every opportunity. It was the ballot box and the will to vote, which are indispensable for democracy, that gave the Kurdish people the opportunity to participate in the government. And as a result of the elections, the Kurds said this: we will govern ourselves and we will govern our city. This was the main motivation and main slogans of Kurdish people. And they did it. However, the state wing always wanted to prevent the Kurds' will to participate in the administration, in the government, which is related to sovereignty. The state was arresting our mayors and council members in the past. However, with every injustice and every unlawful approach towards our elected ones, the Kurdish people supported their party more and fought and objected for their rights more. In the next election, the winner was always the party supported by the Kurds, and the other parties were defeated in the region. Especially in June 2015 elections, HDP exceeded the 10% threshold, and the Kurds were represented in the parliament with 80 seats, which led the state to make new plans. Since then, the policy towards the Kurds has begun with more pressure and more violence, and the collapse plan was put into effect. As you know, our members of parliament were arrested in 2016. I was also a member of parliament at that time. Hundreds of lawsuits were filed against us. At that time, the state presented the solution regarding our municipalities to the parliament as a trustee law, but it was not passed as a law in the parliament until the state of emergency regime in 2016. They found an ingenious solution with the state of emergency declared at that time. They changed the municipal law by a decree, and this regulation is still against the constitution and international agreements, but the regulation which we call trustee regime, was persistently implemented twice. The main opposition party didn't even raise a voice to this that time. And going back to your question, in Van, the Kurdish people's right to vote was taken away twice, completely unjustly and unlawfully, and trustees were appointed. A great anger accumulated among the people against the usurpation of will. Moreover, all resources were plundered in the last 8 years during this trustee regime, and during the 4-month period that I was mayor, we encountered corruption involving huge amounts of money. The governor trustees ostentatiously used the municipal resources for themselves and for their supporters. There was corruption in all the tenders made. There was no service produced in response to this. There was literally not a single service. Local people are directly affected, as you know, by the service not provided. For example, the roads are bad, drinking water is risky. I'm telling you the most basic services. And additionally, municipalities, the budgets were emptied corporately. A debt was left that could not be paid for years. We, as that time in 2019, as 3 metropolitan municipalities, identified these corruption files. We were about to start legal processes, and then trustee was appointed immediately. The people had to live with this oppression for another 5 years. We personally were imprisoned, and for example, in Van, our former mayor, elected mayor, is still in prison, and Gülten Kışanak is also in prison. Selçuk Mızraklı is in prison, and many people like me were first forced into exile. But the real victims were the people living there. This grievance, this anger, the taking away of the people's will, the increasing pressure on the Kurds, as well as the fact that the economy in Turkey is on the verge of bankruptcy, is truly a huge burden. The people who were already struggling with great poverty in their current state became even more victimized by the trust regime. The AKP regime tried to take over many cities by cheating in the elections. The blatant fraud committed on election day is known to everyone in this last election. But for the first time in Turkey and in the history of Turkey, all 14 municipalities were won in Van. It was a great success. The operation of denying the certificate of election to the winning mayor the very next day caused a very loud objections from almost everyone in the city and also in Turkey. The opposition this time louded their voices. It was a civil coup attempt, and this time it was unbearable. There was a great injustice here. This time the people took to the streets with all their might. In previous trustee processes, the pressure from the state and the atmosphere of fear and violence created were greater. At that time, anyone who objected was either arrested or fired from their jobs. Kurdish cities were under a huge blockade by the trust regime. And this trust regime also controls the area under a blockade regime. On the other hand, there are armed panzer law enforcement officers at every step, every street. There has been an uninterrupted ban on meetings and demonstrations in Van for 8 years. Van is an elected place. It is always the focus is always in Van, the state's eyes. I mean, the issue is also on the agenda of this issue is also on the agenda of Council of Europe Human Rights Commissioner, but they are still continuing. Lawsuits have been filed many times, but the governor's office implements this unlawful and arbitrary decision every month. During this practice, people are tagged. Multifaceted security measures were taken to prevent any democratic reaction. People were tagged during this time, and I can describe this period. This is very similar to the days in George Orwell's book in 1984. It was a time when evil was rampant, but everyone and all opposition groups knew that the trustee practice was unfair. The reaction of this period was actually the anger accumulated over the last 8 years. However, election day was the day when the people said enough is enough. This time, people risked everything and took to the streets. The right thing to do was to show democratic reaction, of course, although the government tried to suppress this democratic reaction, they failed, and the people had their last say. It was really a good success.
Absolutely. I would like now to focus on a couple of the more specific aspects of what happened. As you mentioned, sort of in previous years, when similar undemocratic measures have been attempted in Van and elsewhere, the mainstream Republican Party, the second largest party in Turkey, CHP, the People's Republican Party, has not taken any public position. On this occasion in Van, the CHP did speak out, and their position was that the Dem Party should be allowed to take control. How do you assess this? Is it significant? Why the change? What's the politics there?
Yeah, of course, it was a very important approach. I can say that when the first trustee was appointed in the first term, CHP, the biggest, largest opposition party, and all other parties supported this decision by turning a blind eye. Their silence showed that they are supporting this trustee regime. At that time, in 2016, there was a very heavy war in Kurdistan against Kurdish cities. And there was a period of black propaganda claiming that our municipalities provided logistical support in this war. CHP didn't raise its voice at all. I can say that the CHP tacitly approved this. And the CHP itself is responsible for the dismissal and arrest of our MPs by saying it is unconstitutional, but we will say yes for the vote to lift our immunities. And then this process began. This approach encouraged Erdogan. And then they appointed trustees and no voice. In the local elections and after 3 years in March 2019, our term, we made the AKP laws in all the metropolitan cities in the West that were under the control of the AKP in order to create the broadest democratic front. With the votes of the Kurdish people, CHP came to power in 12 metropolitan cities, especially Istanbul, Ankara, Bursa, Antalya, and 12 big cities, metropolitan cities, I mean. However, in a very short time and with greater pressure, the government appointed trustees only to the cities where the Kurds had an election preference and won, like Van, Diyarbakir, and Mardin, the 3 metropolitan Kurdish cities. And then to all the municipalities we won. We were arrested again or forced into exile again. This time, CHP objected with a very weak voice in 2019. It was very weak. But he was not with us. This CHP, he was not with us. Even though democracy, law, constitution, and the basic principles of the republic were destroyed, the Kurds were the ones in question, and in fact, they implicitly supported the Kurdish policy of the government and remained silent. And last year, in the May general elections, we again supported the CHP candidate in the hope of the fundamental rights of the Kurdish people, the end of the trustee regime, and a new solution process. We supported them even if they did not include us in their alliances. However, as you know, the election results were won by AKP. In this election last week, after all the time that has passed, they have begun to understand us when they see that the danger is also directed towards them. When the first trustee was appointed, our call to the opposition was like that. Today, this injustice is being done to us, but tomorrow it will be done to you too. And eventually they realized this danger. Ultimately, the opposition should, at least at a minimum, base itself on the rule of law and the people's choice against this oppression. This time, the attempt to appoint a trustee and to give the authority to the AKP candidate as in one led to the objection of a wide range of opposition. Of course, I find it right in the name of democracy. This is what should have happened in the first place. All segments of society objected louder. It was common knowledge that the trustee regime was implemented only for the Kurdish people. In my opinion, the opposition parties and the CHP, due to their weak voice last time or their own silence, saw this obvious injustice as a serious and imminent threat to themselves. In this sense, it was important for the entire opposition to take a common stand. And as you know, the state had to step back.
And so, yeah, as you say, on this occasion, the state was ultimately forced to step back through a broad coalition that came out against it, both in the streets and also politically. And unusually, there was a change in the result this time. Some people are saying that this marks a changing point in Turkish politics, that here on this occasion, the Kurdish opposition was able to show that its voice, its civil society can still have pressure, even after all the repression which you've just described. Do you think this victory does mark a changing point in Turkish politics?
Sorry. Yes, of course, it was a very good scene. This latest development in Van showed this very clearly. When the opposition united, the government, which wanted to do injustice, took a step back. Uniting against injustice can solve many problems. In my opinion, the one example opened a door to a new era in Turkey. It is possible that a period will begin in which Erdogan, who gave very harsh messages on election night to the Kurdish people, will no longer be able to raise his voice that much. From here, it can be considered as a good opportunity for a new and transparent solution process. The environment is suitable for this right now. And our struggle is, of course, to open the doors of freedom for a truly democratic regime where the law is supreme and everyone feels safe. It is possible. The one result gave hope, I think, to the whole of Turkey. Both the CHP supporters and the base of the other opposition wing ultimately demand a democratic life. Because of this result, the government saw that it could not get anywhere with oppression and violence. It saw what kind of reaction the failure to recognize the will of the people caused, and that the people were now willing to risk anything. He also saw that the Erdogan regime also saw that the heavy repressive regime that had lasted for the last 8 years had harmed them, the Erdogan regime, and their power even more. Local election results are already the result of this pressure regime of the government. We all know that. The government lost everywhere in Turkey. Therefore, it indicates that a solution should be sought instead of more pressure. Of course, I say this for every other opposition sides.
You've suggested this a little in your comments already, but to sort of put the same question the other way around, of course, the government will also be assessing the events in Van. It will be assessing the fact that it was forced to take a step back, as Erdogan has also said he is now rethinking his strategy following repeated losses in Istanbul and in Ankara, and looking ahead to the next presidential elections, to the completion of this term for Erdogan and the future of Turkey. What do you think the government's plans are towards Baku following the developments in the election, and is there a way to oppose those plans?
Yeah, in short, I can say this. The state will no longer be able to continue with its current policies. In fact, I think it will have to retreat from the wrong policies it has made so far. It has to hear the demands of the Kurdish people as a way to somehow maintain its existence. Even though he was preparing for war and thought that he would increase his power with racist policy as before, he also saw that social tension was at a very, very high level because Erdogan will lose power every second he doesn't come to terms with the Kurds. I think the government sees this danger. In addition, this system of plunder and profit has brought the country to an incredible economic threshold. The other most important reason for the last election loss is the economic situation. As long as there is a war in the country, it will be a place where there is no investment, no production, and inflation rises. Therefore, this is at the point where it can no longer continue. Otherwise, it will be their own end. And they know this very clearly. Erdogan understood once again that he could not surpass the Kurdish people through war, dirty policies, and political intrigues. The Kurdish people insist on their demand for democracy and equality. It will continue to raise its demands and struggle to protect, of course, its gains. And the one example also showed what great injustice the Kurds are facing. The trust regime has collapsed, I can say this. Now is the time to talk about peace, I think.
Thank you, Bedia. Thank you for your insights. It's really valuable to have someone with such first-hand experience of these events that we've described. And I know that you're watching these events now from afar, and it's really useful that we're able to share these perspectives and help people to understand better what is happening there on the ground in a place where so many people cannot travel, yourself included. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this chance. Yeah.
And to our listeners, thank you as well. This has been the Kurdistan Connection with myself, Matt Broomfield. Until the next programme, goodbye.